In this session, we're going to look at how to configure single sign-on authentication in StarTeam Server. Now, starting 17.1 version, StarTeam Server provides support for secure authentication using single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. So this is supported only on Windows servers. To start with configuring single sign-on authentication, open up the StarTeam administration tool, log on to the selected StarTeam server, and go to Configure Server and click on the Authentication tab. You can see that by default, all the server configurations are single sign-on has been disabled. To enable single sign-on authentication, click on the single sign-on authentication radio button. One prerequisite is that you'd have to configure the primary directory service in StarTeam before you do the single sign-on authentication. Once you click on the Enable Single Sign-On Authentication radio button, it's going to populate some of the fields in this page. You can see that the OAuth issuer URL. Now, this is the base URL for OSP, which is the single sign-on provider. And this field is pre-populated to point to the OSP service running on a StarTeam web service instance. If you have a custom port for your Tomcat server, you would have to update it here to reflect that. The next one is the session timeout. So this is a timeout for the authentication sessions on the client browser. Once a user has been authenticated successfully using single sign-on, the browser session remains active using session cookies for this time which is specified here. So the default is 1 hour or 3,600 seconds. This can also be configured as per the customer requirement. Next, we need to configure Ldap server details. So you can see that the host name and the port has already been copied over from the directory servers tab over to this place. You would have to enter a valid Ldap user and password. So this will be used for authenticating the Ldap users. Now, SSL, if you have in your directory service the SSL option enabled, single sign-on authentication will automatically use it. One thing you would need to do is to import the Ldap certificate into the Keystore which is being used. Now, SSO authentication supports two types of directory services. One is the Microsoft Active Directory, and the second one is NetIQ's eDirectory. The default is set to Active Directory, but you can choose it accordingly. Next, we need to enter the container DN, which you can get from your Ldap administrator. Once this is done, Ldap repository will now be used as a source for user data. Let's move on to configuring the Keystore. OSP uses public key cryptography for establishing client-server trust, and also digitally signing messages and data encryption. Now, by default, there is a Keystore which is installed along with the StarTeam server. You can find this under the server install path osp keystore ospkeystore.jks. The type of the keystore is pkcs12. JKS and pkcs12 are the two supported keystores. Now, the first time you configure single sign-on authentication, you would have to change the password for both the key and the keystore. So with that, once this configuration is done, click on save, and you'll be required to restart the server and the web service for single sign-on authentication to take effect. Now, once this is done, all the 17.1 and later clients will automatically use single sign-on to connect to the server. If you open up a StarTeam 17.1 version of the StarTeam cross-platform client, you have the option of disabling single sign-on authentication if the user doesn't want to. Now, we'll see later that this can be enforced. The single sign-on authentication can be enforced on the server for certain users. So once the server has been started, click on the Configure Server tab, go to Authentication and click on Test Settings to verify that the OAuth 2 provider settings are valid. Now that single sign-on has been configured, let's validate it from the client. Now, select the server, click on Log On. So this is going to open up the system's default web browser. Now, you can put in your username and password, and this is going to go through OSP, which is the single sign-on provider, where the validation of the user will be done and a token will be sent back to the client. The token has to be sent to the StarTeam server, which will be verified on the server. So you can see that the single sign-on authentication has been successful. And now you can actually go and enforce single sign-on on a specific user, so that if the user is using an older version of the StarTeam client, or if they have their single sign-on disabled on the client side, you will see that the server would prevent the user from logging into the server. You would basically get this error saying that you'd have to use single sign-on to log into the server. Now, what single sign-on provides is it's a secure form of authentication, and also it lets multiple StarTeam clients on your machine to reuse the authentication, so that you don't have to put in the credentials every time. Last thing is, you can also choose to do a bulk enforcement on the users. So if you want to enable single sign-on for a certain selected users, you can click on Enforce SSO or multi-factor authentication, click on Enable. And that is the end of the session. Thank you for listening.